Clara Whitcomb kept the windmill running because of the last thing her husband ever asked her. Not the last thing he said in the hospital, when his voice had already grown thin and careful. Not the polite words people repeated after the funeral. The real last request came 2 weeks earlier, when Daniel Whitcomb sat at the kitchen table with trembling hands. An old water map spread open beneath the yellow lamp, while rain tapped against the windows like fingers asking to be let in. "If they come for the East Field," he told her, "don't sell until the windmill turns in a storm." At the time, Clara thought grief had come early. The East Field was dead clay. Nothing grew there except broomweed, thistle, and the kind of grass cattle passed without lowering their heads. The windmill was rusted nearly still, its tail bent, its blades creaking even when the air barely moved. The old stone ditches Daniel talked about had been buried for decades beneath dust, roots, and bad memory. And Daniel, who had once worked for the county water board, refused to explain why his hands shook every time the new industrial park was mentioned. 7 years later, the men came. They came with contracts, survey flags, pickup trucks, lawyers, and smiles that did not reach their eyes. They told Clara the land was worthless. They told her Daniel's maps were outdated. They told her the valley had moved on. But when the storm finally came, the windmill turned, and Daniel's secret turned with it. If stories about old promises, forgotten land, and people the world was too quick to dismiss mean something to you, consider subscribing, because what happened on Clara Whitcomb's East Field was not just about a widow, a rusted windmill, or a data center. It was about the truth water had been carrying for 50 years. The final survey meeting happened on a Thursday morning under a white sky that promised heat before noon. By 9 o'clock, Clara Whitcomb's East Field was already crowded with county trucks, survey flags, and men who looked at the land as if it had stopped belonging to her before she had even signed a thing. A black SUV from Harrow Data Systems idled near the fence. 2 surveyors in orange vests moved through the weeds, pushing pink flags into the hard clay. Each flag looked small by itself. Together, they made a line that cut straight toward the old windmill. Clara stood beside it in Daniel's faded canvas jacket. The jacket was too heavy for the weather, but she wore it anyway. One sleeve still carried a dark grease stain near the cuff, left from the years when Daniel came home smelling of pump oil, rainwater, and wet stone. Behind her, the windmill leaned against the sky. It was not beautiful. Clara knew that. Rust climbed the tower legs. One blade was patched with tin. The pump rod knocked softly whenever the wind shifted, making a hollow sound somewhere beneath the ground. To the men in pressed shirts, it looked like junk. To Clara, it looked like the last sentence Daniel had never finished. Grant Hollis, the county supervisor, stepped out of his truck with a folder under one arm. He wore a clean, hard hat and polished boots, the kind that had never stood in mud long enough to learn anything from it. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said, "we appreciate your cooperation." "I haven't cooperated yet," Clara said. One surveyor looked down to hide a smile. Grant kept his public smile in place. Behind him stood a company lawyer and a young engineer named Maya Larkin, holding a tablet against her ribs. Maya studied the field with polite impatience, as if she had already measured everything worth knowing and found Clara's grief included in the acreage. Near the fence, Clara's daughter Rachel waited with folded arms. Rachel had driven in before sunrise. She had not come to defend the land. She had come to help her mother let go of it before the whole county had to watch her refuse. Grant opened the folder. "The county has approved the access plan," he said. "Harrow Data Systems is prepared to purchase the remaining acreage at a generous price. This would resolve the easement issue and spare everyone a long legal process." The lawyer held out the papers. Clara did not take them. Rachel stepped closer. "Mom, please, it's enough to fix the roof, enough to pay the back taxes, enough so you don't have to keep choosing between medicine and furnace oil." Clara looked at her daughter and saw no greed there, only worry. That made it harder. Grant softened his voice, the way men did when they wanted cruelty to sound practical. "This is dead clay, Clara. It hasn't produced in decades. We're not asking you to give up good land." The words landed in front of everyone. Dead clay. Not Daniel's field. Not their life. Not the place where he had stood through storms. listening to water no one else respected. Just dead clay. Clara looked past him. One pink flag had been planted near a shallow dip half hidden by weeds. Daniel used to stop there after rain, hands in his pockets, staring at the ground as if water had left him a message only he could read. Maya followed Clara's eyes. "There's no active drainage channel there," Maya said. "We ran ground scans. The company's maps are current." "The company's maps," Clara repeated. Grant gave a short laugh. With respect, modern hydrology is more reliable than Daniel's old hand-drawn notes. A few men near the trucks chuckled. The sound reached Clara slowly. Daniel had heard that laugh when he was alive. Men with cleaner shoes and newer equipment had called him difficult, stubborn, outdated. Now they were doing the same to him after death, because a dead man could not stand in his own field and answer back. Clara rested one hand on the windmill tower. The metal was already warm. Maya tapped her tablet. "Your east field is classified as low-value upland clay. The drainage basin for the data center is fully modeled." "Does your model show the water before 1968? Clara asked. Maya stopped tapping. The lawyer glanced at Grant. Grant closed the folder. "That has no bearing on current approvals. It has bearing on where water remembers to go," Clara said. Rachel exhaled sharply. "Mom, Dad is gone. You don't have to keep fighting his old battles." For one tired second, Clara almost agreed. She almost took the papers. Almost signed away the clay, the weeds, the windmill, the buried stones, and the question Daniel had left inside her life. Then the wind shifted. The windmill gave one long, dry creak. One surveyor laughed openly. Grant smiled. "That thing couldn't pull water from a teacup." Clara looked at the pink flags again. They were not just marking an access road. They were cutting straight across the place Daniel had warned her never to sell. She turned to Maya. "Before you dig there," Clara said, "you should ask why your new map is missing the old ditch." No one answered, but Maya looked down at her tablet. Then she looked at the field. And for the first time that morning, she did not look so sure. Before Clara Whitcomb ever learned to fear a map, she learned to trust the sound of water. Not the roar of a river after a storm, not the clean rush from a kitchen faucet. The small sounds came first. A thread of runoff slipping under fence wire, a hollow drip beneath a stone culvert. The soft ticking of water inside old clay after rain had already stopped. Daniel heard those sounds before she did. When they were young, he would take her walking after storms, long before the valley had industrial roads, security lights, or a data center shining against the ridge. He carried a notebook in his shirt pocket, a folded ruler, and a pencil worn down so short Clara teased him for being too stubborn to buy another. "Water is never lost," he told her once, standing in knee-high grass near the east field. "People just forget where they forced it to go." Back then, Clara thought, that was the kind of thing a man said when he loved his work too much. Daniel Whitcomb had not been an important man in the way the county measured importance. He did not wear suits. He did not speak loudly at meetings. He drove an old green pickup with a cracked windshield and kept rubber boots in the bed, even during dry months. But farmers trusted him because he walked their land before he judged it. If a creek bed ran dry, Daniel climbed down into it. If a pasture flooded, he knelt in the mud and pressed his fingers into the soil. If an old woman said her well had tasted different since the road crew blasted rock upstream, Daniel did not laugh. He filled jars, labeled them, and drove them himself to the county office. That was why the small farmers liked him. That was also why the board did not. Clara remembered the first year something changed in him. It was 1968. Though she did not understand the importance of that year until much later. Rachel was still little then, still losing her front teeth and sleeping with one hand curled around a stuffed rabbit. Clara had been sick most of that spring, not sick enough to die, but sick enough that Daniel came home early when he could, and cooked soup badly because he refused to admit he did not know how. During that same spring, county men began visiting farms west of Whitcomb Ridge. They carried clipboards and new survey charts. They spoke of modernization, consolidation, drainage improvement, and water-poor acreage. Those words sounded harmless in the newspaper. On porches and kitchen tables, they sounded different. They meant loans denied. They meant insurance adjusted. They meant a farmer being told his land could no longer support what his father had planted. One by one, families Clara knew began selling. The Alvarez place went first, then the Miller brothers, then old Mrs. Hensley's 40 acres near the stone crossing. People said the land had gone bad. People said the water table had shifted. People said progress was progress, and small farms had to make room for bigger plans. Daniel said almost nothing. That was what frightened Clara. Her husband had always been quiet, but his quiet usually had warmth in it. After those meetings, it changed. He came home with his face drawn tight, set his lunch pail by the door, and washed his hands longer than necessary. Some evenings he sat at the kitchen table with maps spread wide beneath the lamp, tracing lines with one finger and then crossing them out. When Clara asked what was wrong, he would say, "Numbers don't lie unless men teach them how." Then he would fold the papers before she could read them. At first, she was hurt. Marriage, to Clara, had always meant sharing the weight before it broke one person's back. But Daniel began carrying something alone. He locked one drawer in his desk. He stopped leaving his notebooks open. He walked to the windmill after midnight, even in rain, and stood there listening to the old pump breathe beneath the tower. Clara watched from the porch more than once. She would see him in the dark, one hand on the tower leg, head bent as if confessing to metal. Sometimes he brought a lantern. Sometimes he brought survey stakes and pushed them into the ground, only to pull them out again before morning. The East Field became the place he would not explain. To everyone else, it was useless clay. Even before the drought years, it had never given much. Corn burned there. Beans yellowed. Grass came thin and bitter. Clara had asked Daniel once why he did not lease it out or let it go wild. He answered, "Because that field tells the truth when the rest of the valley is lying." She had laughed softly then, thinking he meant it as poetry. Daniel did not laugh with her. As the years passed, the farms that had sold became storage yards, county lots, and eventually empty parcels waiting for better buyers. The families who left were spoken of less and less. Their names faded from church suppers and school rosters. Children grew up not knowing whose barns had stood beyond the ridge before the land was renamed for development. Daniel kept working for the water board, but something in him never returned. He still fixed neighbors' pumps without charging widows. He still took Rachel fishing in the spring creek. He still held Clara's hand in church and warmed her side of the bed with a hot water bottle during winter. But there were moments when she would catch him looking across the fields with such shame in his eyes that it made her afraid to ask what he saw. Then, late in his life, the industrial park was announced. The county called it a future corridor. Investors called it opportunity. Harrow Data Systems was only a rumor then, a company looking for land with access, power, and water control. Men came with new studies, cleaner maps, and promises that the valley would finally matter. Daniel read the article at the breakfast table and went pale. Clara noticed his fingers tighten around the paper. "What is it?" she asked. He folded the page carefully, too carefully. "They're looking in the wrong place," he said. "For what?" Daniel looked toward the window, past the porch, past the barn, toward the windmill on the east field. "For permission," he said. That was all. In the months after that, he grew weaker. His heart failed slowly, then quickly. Doctors used gentle words that meant the same thing. Clara began measuring life in pill bottles, appointment cards, and the distance between Daniel's good days. 2 weeks before the hospital, he called her to the kitchen table. The old water map was already open when she came in. It was not one map, really, but many. County sheets, hand-drawn overlays, soil notes, creek marks, old property lines, and red pencil scars crossing places Clara did not recognize anymore. Daniel's hands trembled above them. "If they come for the east field," he said, "don't sell until the windmill turns in a storm." Clara sat across from him. "Daniel, who is they?" He closed his eyes. For a moment, she thought he might finally tell her everything. Instead, he touched the map near the east field and whispered, "I thought I could fix it without making you hate me." Those words stayed with her longer than any doctor's sentence. She reached for his hand, but he pulled the map back and folded it with painful care. Then, he gave her the key to the desk drawer. "Not yet," he said. "Only when the valley forgets again." 7 years later, standing before Grant Hollis, Harrow Data Systems, and the flags cutting toward the buried ditch, Clara understood the worst part of grief. It was not only losing the man she loved. It was realizing he had left her with a promise shaped like a wound, and that keeping it might require her to learn who he had really been. The day after the survey meeting, Clara went out to the windmill before sunrise. She did not go because she felt brave. She went because sleep had become useless. All night, she had seen Daniel's hands trembling above the kitchen map. She had heard Grant Hollis laughing at the tower. She had seen Maya Larkin's face change when Clara asked about the water before 1968. That small change troubled Clara more than the laughter. A laugh was easy to understand. Doubt was not. The windmill stood in the blue-gray light with its head turned slightly east, as if listening for weather still beyond the ridge. Up close, it looked worse than it had the day before. Rust had opened thin red lines along the tower bolts. The tail vane was bent at one corner. A sparrow had packed straw into the frame where a missing cover plate should have been. Clara set Daniel's old toolbox in the clay. The latches resisted her at first. Then they snapped open with a tired metallic click. Inside were things most people would have thrown away: a cracked leather glove, a tin of washers, a stub of carpenter's pencil, a brass oil can, 2 pipe wrenches, and a small notebook with the cover curled from damp. Clara touched the notebook, but did not open it yet. She was not ready for Daniel's handwriting. Instead, she looked up at the windmill. For years, neighbors had called it an eyesore. Some had said it made the property look abandoned. Others joked that it was the only thing in Whitcomb Valley older than Clara's stubbornness. Even Rachel had once offered to pay someone to haul it down before it killed a cow, a child, or Clara herself. But Daniel had never treated it like junk. Every spring, even after his knees began to hurt, he climbed the first few feet of the tower and checked the bolts. Every fall, he greased the pump rod. When drought turned the field hard as fired brick, he still walked out after supper and rested his hand against the tower leg as if checking a pulse. Clara had thought it was sentiment. Now she was not so sure. She took the brass oil can and worked a little oil into the lower joint. The metal swallowed it slowly. When she pushed the pump rod, it moved half an inch and stopped with a deep knock from below ground. Not broken, Clara thought. Blocked. That was a Daniel word. He had used it for pipes, ditches, arguments, marriages, and grief. Water does not vanish, Clara. It gets blocked. Same as people. She knelt beside the concrete base. Most of it was hidden under weeds and blown dirt. But one corner showed through. Daniel had scratched something there years ago, so lightly she had always mistaken it for random damage. Now she brushed the dirt away with her sleeve. 3 short lines. Then a gap. Then one longer line pointing southeast. Clara sat back on her heels. It was not a mark made by accident. It was the kind of mark Daniel used on old drainage sketches, a private shorthand for direction of fall. She turned and looked across the east field. To anyone else, it was plain ugliness. Clay, thistle, dead grass. A wide, tired piece of land with no shade and no crop worth naming, but Clara began to see what Daniel had seen. The shallow dip near the survey flag was not alone. There was another beyond it, almost invisible under broomweed. Then another near the old fence corner. They did not form a straight line. They curved slightly, following the softest grade in the field. Like ribs, Daniel had called them once. The valley's ribs. Clara stood and began walking. The ground was hard, but not evenly hard. In some places, it rang under her boots. In others, it gave just enough to suggest something hollow beneath. She carried one of Daniel's old survey rods and pushed it into the clay every few yards. Most places, it stopped shallow, but near the first dip, the rod slid deeper. Clara pushed again. The rod struck stone. Not gravel, not random rock. Stone laid flat. Her heart began to beat harder. She scraped with a hand trowel until the top of one stone appeared under the clay. It was smooth, rounded at the edges, set beside another stone with a narrow gap between them. Roots had threaded through the gap, and dirt had sealed everything over. but the pattern was too deliberate to be natural. Daniel had not imagined the ditch. He had buried it. Or someone had. By mid-morning, Clara had uncovered only 3 stones and exhausted herself badly enough that her hands shook. She sat in the shade of the windmill tower and drank warm water from a jar. The field around her remained quiet except for insects and the faint ticking of hot metal. Then tires crackled on the road. A white Harrow Data Systems truck stopped by the fence. Maya Larkin stepped out. She was alone. No lawyer, no Grant Hollis, no polished county boots. She carried a tablet, a rolled safety vest, and the expression of a person who had spent the night trying to dismiss a question and failing. "Mrs. Whitcomb," Maya called. "I'm not here officially." Clara did not stand. "That means you're either honest or in trouble." Maya glanced toward the road before opening the gate. "Maybe both." She crossed the field carefully, avoiding the thistle. When she reached the windmill, she looked down at the exposed stones. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she crouched. "These weren't on the scan report," she said. "No," Clara answered. "I expect not." Maya took a small measuring device from her pocket and ran it above the stones. She frowned at the reading, then turned back toward the line of pink flags. "The proposed drainage cut crosses this area," she said. "I noticed." Maya's jaw tightened. "If there's an old structure below ground, it should have been logged. Maybe someone didn't want it logged." Maya looked up. There it was again. Not belief. Not yet. But the first bruise on certainty. Clara reached into Daniel's toolbox and took out the curled notebook. She opened it only because Maya was there, and because the field had already begun speaking whether Clara was ready or not. Daniel's handwriting filled the first page. Eastfield. Lower vein still open under cap clay. Windmill draw connected to stone run. Do not cut southeast line. Maya read the words over Clara's shoulder. "What does lower vein mean?" she asked. Clara closed the notebook halfway, suddenly protective. "It means Daniel knew something your maps don't. That doesn't make our maps wrong." "No," Clara said, "but it makes them incomplete." Maya stood and looked toward the data center site beyond the ridge. The new buildings were visible in pieces through the morning haze. Steel frames, white trailers, cranes, temporary lights still glowing though the sun was up. Modern things, expensive things, certain things. Then Maya looked back at the windmill. "What does the pump connect to?" she asked. Clara almost said she did not know, but that was not true anymore. She knew enough to be afraid. She pointed to the exposed stones, then to the shallow dips curving through the field, then to the tower above them. "I think the windmill was never just pulling water up," Clara said. "I think it was helping water move through." Maya stared at her. "That is not how this system is supposed to work." Clara looked at Daniel's marks on the concrete base. "No," she said. "It's how the valley worked before someone changed the system." A gust of wind moved across the field. The windmill blades shifted once, just a little, then stopped. Maya heard it. Clara knew she did. For the first time, the young engineer did not look at the old machine like scrap. She looked at it like a witness. By Saturday morning, the East Field had become a place people slowed down to watch. Not because they believed Clara, because failure, in a small town, was still a kind of entertainment. Word had spread that the widow on Whitcomb Road was trying to bring the old windmill back to life. By 8 o'clock, 2 pickup trucks had parked along the ditch across from her fence. By 9, a county maintenance crew had arrived to observe. By 10, Grant Hollis was standing near his truck with a paper cup of coffee, looking as if he had expected exactly this. Clara tried not to look at any of them. She stood at the base of the tower with Daniel's toolbox open beside her, and Eli Boone crouched near the pump housing. Eli was 23, thin as a rail, and too young to remember the farms that had vanished west of the ridge. He worked part-time at the feed store and fixed lawn tractors behind his uncle's garage. Clara had hired him because he listened more than he talked, and because when she showed him Daniel's notebook, he did not laugh. He only said, "Ma'am, this thing is older than every tool I own." Then he came anyway. Now he lay on his side in the clay, one arm inside the lower pump box, trying to loosen a rusted pin with a socket wrench that kept slipping. "Try not to force it," Clara said. Eli glanced up, sweat already darkening his collar. Mrs. Whitcomb, I'm trying not to breathe on it too hard. The pump box gave a sharp metallic squeal. Across the fence, someone chuckled. Rachel stood near Clara's porch steps, arms folded tight. She had come because Clara had not answered the phone the night before. She watched Eli work, then looked at the windmill tower, then at her mother. You could have told me you were hiring someone, Rachel said. I didn't hire a lawyer, Clara answered. I hired a boy with a wrench. That boy with a wrench is under a tower that could fall. It won't fall today. You don't know that. Clara said nothing, because the truth was, Rachel was not wrong. The tower moaned when the wind touched it. The patched blade trembled. The pump rod was scarred with rust. Every part of the thing looked tired enough to surrender. But beneath Clara's fear was something harder. Daniel had not asked her to protect a memory. He had asked her to wait for a storm. And if the windmill could not turn at all, then Clara had been guarding a promise with no door left in it. Maya arrived just before noon. This time, she did not come alone. A company supervisor named Brent Vale stepped out of the passenger side of her truck, wearing a white safety helmet and a shirt with the Harrow logo stitched over the pocket. He had the easy smile of a man trained to sound reasonable while saying no. Mrs. Whitcomb, Brent called. We have serious concerns about unauthorized excavation near the proposed easement. Clara looked at the 3 small holes she and Eli had opened along the stone line. Each one was no wider than a dinner plate. You call that excavation? We call it interference with a pending infrastructure project. Grant smiled into his coffee. Maya would not meet Clara's eyes. That told Clara enough. The young engineer had talked to someone. Or someone had talked to her. Eli slid out from under the pump box, holding up the rusted pin. Got it. For 1 second, Clara forgot the trucks, the county, Rachel, and the men watching from the road. The pin lay in Eli's palm like a small victory. They replaced it with a new steel pin Eli had shaped the night before. He tightened the bracket, checked the pump rod, then climbed the first 6 feet of the tower to release the brake cable. The cable fought him, then gave way with a dry snap. The wind shifted. The blades moved, only a little at first. A shiver through the wheel, a scrape of metal. Then, one slow turn. Clara held her breath. The pump rod dropped, rose, dropped again. Inside the ground, something knocked. Eli grinned. There we go. Then the belt slipped. The wheel jerked hard. The pump rod jammed. One patched blade struck the frame with a sound like a gunshot, bent backward, and froze. The entire tower shook. Rachel cried out. Eli jumped down and stumbled away. For a moment, no one spoke. Then laughter broke from the road. Not quiet laughter this time. Not hidden behind a hand. Open laughter. Grant Hollis lowered his coffee and shook his head. Well, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. That is why we don't build public policy around antiques. One of the county workers laughed harder. Brent Vale stepped forward with a polished look of concern. Mrs. Whitcomb, this is exactly the liability issue we warned about. Clara stared up at the bent blade. Her face stayed still, but something inside her sank. The windmill had moved. It had moved, and then failed in front of everyone. That was worse than not moving at all. Rachel came to her side, her voice low and urgent. Mom, look at this. Look at what just happened. Eli could have been hurt. You could have been hurt. I know. Then stop. Clara looked at her daughter. Rachel's eyes were wet now. Not from embarrassment alone. From fear. I'm not trying to take Dad away from you, Rachel said. But whatever he left in that drawer, it is not worth you dying under a pile of rust. That sentence struck Clara harder than Grant's laughter. Because Rachel did not sound angry anymore. She sounded like a daughter who had been losing her mother to a dead man's secret for 7 years. Brent opened a leather folder and removed a new packet of papers. Harrow is prepared to revise the offer, he said. Substantially. Grant's smile faded just a little. Clara noticed. Brent continued. The revised agreement would purchase the East Field, resolve your tax issues, cover removal of the windmill, and provide relocation support if you choose not to remain on the property during construction. Rachel looked at the papers before Clara did. "How much?" she asked. Brent told her. The number changed the air. Even Eli, still dusty from the clay, looked down. It was enough money to repair Clara's house twice over. Enough to erase the back taxes. Enough to pay doctors, fix the furnace, replace the truck, and give Rachel the one thing she had wanted for years. Proof that her mother would not freeze alone in an old farmhouse out of loyalty to a secret. Clara reached for the packet. Rachel's shoulders softened. Then Clara saw the final page. A confidentiality clause. All historical maps, personal water records, field notes, survey materials, and related documents connected to the property were to be transferred to Harrow Data Systems for private review. Clara would agree not to disclose, publish, copy, distribute, or discuss those materials with outside parties. Her hand stopped. "That's not buying land," she said. Brent's smile stayed smooth. "It is standard risk management." "No," Clara said. "It's buying silence." Maya looked away. That was the second time. Clara folded the packet closed and handed it back. Rachel stared at her mother, as if she had just watched her refuse rescue. Grant stepped forward, voice colder now. "Mrs. Whitcomb, you are making this harder than it has to be." "No," Clara said, looking at the broken windmill, the exposed stones, and the men waiting for her to become ashamed enough to surrender. "I think that's what Daniel did." For the first time all day, Maya looked directly at her. Clara picked up the rusted pin Eli had removed and closed her fingers around it. The old machine had failed, but the offer had revealed something the machine could not. They were afraid of what Daniel left behind. The first proof came quietly. Not with thunder. Not with the windmill roaring back to life. Not with Grant Hollis apologizing in front of the road crew, or Harrow Data Systems pulling its flags from Clara's field. It came the next morning, after a thin night rain that most people in Whitcomb Valley would have called useless. The kind of rain that darkened porch boards, but did not fill barrels. The kind that put silver on fence wire for an hour, then disappeared before breakfast. The kind of rain Daniel used to call a listener's rain, because it did not make enough noise to distract a person from where it went. Clara woke before dawn and knew something was different. She could hear it, a faint trickle, not from the roof gutter, not from the kitchen sink, not from the ditch by the road. From the east field, she put on Daniel's jacket over her nightgown, stepped into her boots without socks, and carried a flashlight through the back gate. The air smelled of wet clay and iron. Above the field, the windmill stood still again, its bent blade caught at an awkward angle from the failed test the day before. Clara did not look at it long. She followed the sound. At first, she saw nothing but dark weeds and black soil slicked by rain. Then, the flashlight caught a thread of moving water near the shallow dip where the pink survey flag had been planted. It was no wider than her thumb, but it was moving. Clara lowered herself carefully, one hand on her knee, and watched. The water should have been sliding west toward the roadside ditch, and the basin Harrow had already graded beyond the ridge. That was what Maya's map said. That was what the company's drainage model said. That was what Grant Hollis had said with the confidence of a man who never expected clay to contradict him. But the little thread of water moved southeast, toward the windmill, toward the buried stones, toward the line Daniel had marked on the concrete base. Clara's breath caught. For one long moment, she was not 77. She was 31 again, standing beside Daniel after a storm, watching him kneel in wet grass with his pencil behind his ear. Water tells the truth if you get low enough to listen. She almost laughed. Then she almost cried. Instead, she went back to the house and called Eli. By 7, Eli was there with a shovel, a thermos of coffee, and the look of a young man who had been awakened too early but was interested enough not to complain. Clara showed him the thread of water. He squatted beside it. "Well," he said, "that's not running where they said it would." "No. You want me to dig?" "I want you to be careful." He smiled a little. "You always want both." They opened the ground beside the trickle with hand tools. No machines. No wide cuts. Only trowels, a narrow spade, and patience. 6 inches down, Eli found the first stone. 8 inches down, Clara found the second. By 10 inches, the pattern became clear. The stones formed a shallow channel, capped with clay so tightly that from the surface it looked like dead, solid ground. Between the stones ran a thin black gap where water still slipped through, patient and cold. Eli sat back on his heels. "Somebody built this." Daniel said the valley had ribs, Clara said. Eli touched the stone with 2 fingers. "Then, somebody buried the bones." Clara looked toward the road. For once, no trucks had stopped to watch. That seemed like mercy. It did not last. Maya arrived a little before 8. Alone again, but moving faster than the day before. She had mud on the cuffs of her jeans and dark half-moons under her eyes. "You called me 3 times, she said. "I thought you might want to see your map lose an argument." Maya did not smile. She came straight to the exposed channel and knelt beside it. The water was still moving. Clara took a small splinter of cedar from Daniel's toolbox and placed it into the trickle. The splinter floated west for 2 inches, caught the hidden pull beneath the clay, then turned. Slowly, unmistakably, it moved southeast. Maya stared at it. "Do it again," she said. Clara did. The second splinter did the same. Maya pulled out her tablet, opened a map, and zoomed in until her fingers trembled slightly against the screen. She turned the tablet, stood, took 3 steps, then crouched again. "That grade is wrong," she whispered. "The land or the map?" Maya did not answer. Eli leaned on his shovel. "That sounds like an answer." Maya shot him a look, but there was no strength in it. She walked toward the nearest pink flag, then back to the ditch, counting her steps under her breath. After that, she opened a measuring app and checked the elevation against a small receiver clipped to her belt. Her face changed in pieces. First, annoyance, then confusion, then something close to fear. "The company survey shows this field draining northwest," she said. "It doesn't." "No," Maya said. "It doesn't." Clara waited. She had learned from Daniel that silence could be a tool if you did not use it to hide. Maya wiped rainwater from the tablet screen, though the rain had already stopped. "If this channel continues under the easement," she said, "then the proposed cut could interrupt subsurface movement." "That sounds important." "It could be nothing." "But it isn't." Maya looked at the water again. "No," she said quietly. "It probably isn't." Those 5 words gave Clara more strength than she expected. Not because Maya fully believed her. She did not yet. But because, for the first time, someone from the modern world had looked at Daniel's old field and admitted that the ground knew something the model did not. They followed the channel another 20 feet. Eli uncovered more stone. Clara brushed away clay. Maya took measurements she said were unofficial, then took more, which made Clara suspect they mattered more than she wanted to admit. Near the 3rd dip in the field, the channel turned beneath a knot of thistle roots. As Eli cleared it, his shovel struck something metal. Not pipe, not rebar, a small capped tube, dark with age, wedged between 2 flat stones. Clara's hands went cold. Eli looked at her. "Should I pull it?" Clara wanted to say no. The tube had Daniel all over it. Not literally. There was no name, no writing, no mark except a strip of old red survey tape sealed beneath the cap. But she knew. Some things carried the shape of the person who hid them. "Careful," she said. Eli worked it loose and handed it to her. The cap resisted. Maya offered a multi-tool. Clara took it, twisted slowly, and opened the tube over Daniel's toolbox. Inside was a roll of paper wrapped in waxed cloth. The paper was dry. Clara unrolled it with 2 fingers. It was not a treasure map. It was not a deed. It was a list. 3 farm names were written in Daniel's careful block letters. Alvarez West, Spring Line. Miller Stone Crossing Basin. Hensley Lower East Run. Beside each name were dates, watermarks, and page references Clara did not understand. But she understood enough. These were not random notes. These were families. Maya leaned closer. "Are those property names?" "They were people," Clara said. Eli's voice dropped. "Were?" Clara looked toward the valley road, toward the places where barns used to stand before time and paperwork made them disappear. Before the county said their land went dry. No one spoke. Then a car door slammed near the house. Rachel was coming across the field in work shoes that were already sinking into the damp clay. She looked angry until she saw the three of them kneeling over the open tube. "What happened?" she asked. Clara held out the paper. Rachel took it carefully, still breathing hard from the walk. Her eyes moved over the names. At first, there was no recognition. Then her face changed. "Hensley," she said. Clara looked at her. Rachel touched the last line. "Lydia Hensley was in my third-grade class. She left before Christmas. I remember because she gave me her blue pencil box." The field seemed to grow wider around them. "She told everyone they were moving because her father got work in Tulsa," Rachel said. "But my teacher cried that day." Clara closed her eyes. For years, the missing farms had been part of the valley's background, like old fence posts or empty roads. Everyone knew they were gone. No one asked what had pushed them out. Now Daniel's paper lay in Rachel's hands, and the old loss had a child's face. Maya stepped back from the ditch. "This needs to be documented properly," she said. Clara looked at her. "By whom?" Maya did not answer quickly. That was answer enough. The thin water kept moving through the exposed stones, carrying bits of clay along its hidden path. It was not enough to flood anything, not enough to save anything. Not yet, but it was enough to prove one thing. Clara Whitcomb had not been guarding dead ground. She had been standing on the first sentence of a buried record. Maya did not take Daniel's paper with her. She photographed it, measured the tube, logged the coordinates, and said 3 times that none of it was official. Then she drove away with her jaw tight and her tablet face down on the passenger seat, as if the device itself had become something she no longer trusted. By evening, the east field had gone quiet again. The little thread of water still moved beneath the exposed stones, but slower now. The rain had passed. The sun had hardened the surface clay. The windmill stood frozen above it all, bent blade caught in the same awkward position, like a witness who had spoken once and then lost its voice. Clara sat at the kitchen table with the paper from the tube spread in front of her. Rachel sat across from her. Neither woman had turned on the overhead light. Only the small lamp over the stove burned, throwing the room into the same yellow half-darkness Clara remembered from Daniel's final weeks. The 3 farm names seemed larger now than they had in the field. Alvarez, Miller, Hensley. Rachel touched the last name again. "I remember Lydia's mother," she said. "She used to make cinnamon rolls for school fundraisers. I thought they moved because her father found better work. That's what people said." Did Dad know different? Clara did not answer. The question sat between them, heavier than accusation because neither of them wanted the answer. Daniel's locked desk drawer was in the small back room he had once called his office. For 7 years, Clara had opened it only twice. The first time was after the funeral, when she found old county maps, field notes, and receipts for pump parts. The second was when the industrial park rumors became real, and she had searched for anything that might explain why Daniel had feared the East Field being sold. Both times, she had stopped before reaching the bottom, not because she lacked curiosity, because grief sometimes survives by refusing to turn over the last page. That night, Clara took the key from the sugar tin on the shelf. Rachel followed her without speaking. The office smelled of paper, dust, and dry cedar. Daniel's desk still faced the window overlooking the east field. Clara had never moved it. On the wall above, it hung his old county water board identification badge, yellowed at the edges. In the photo, Daniel was younger, dark-haired, unsmiling, and certain in a way Clara barely recognized. She unlocked the drawer. Inside were maps, folded into maps, notebooks tied with string, and envelopes labeled in Daniel's careful hand. Most labels were practical: pump records, well tests, stone crossing grade, east run measurements. But at the very back, under a cracked plastic ruler, was an envelope Clara did not remember seeing before. The paper had gone brown at the edges. Across the front, Daniel had written 4 words: not proof, only shame. Rachel read it over Clara's shoulder and went still. "Mom," she whispered. Clara's fingers closed around the envelope. For a moment, she wanted to put it back. She wanted to return to the life in which Daniel had been difficult, but good, secretive, but noble, burdened, but innocent. She wanted the man who fixed widows' pumps for free and warmed her side of the bed in winter. She wanted the father who taught Rachel to bait a hook and carried her sleeping from the truck after county fairs. She did not want the man who had written the word shame, but wanting had never changed the direction of water. Clara opened the envelope. Inside was a folded county report, dated the 14th of October, 1968. The title was typed in block letters: Whitcomb Valley Water Viability and Drainage Reclassification. Rachel pulled a chair closer. Clara unfolded the first page. The language was clean, official, bloodless. It spoke of seasonal instability, reduced agricultural potential, non-productive acreage, necessary consolidation, and long-term development suitability. The report did not sound cruel. That was what made it crueler. It described land as if no one had buried parents there, as if wells did not have family names, as if a farm could become non-viable simply because a page said so. Clara turned to the attached map. There it was. The east field, but the stone ditch line was missing. So were the lower spring marks. So was the southeast run. The map showed the valley draining northwest, away from the old farms and toward the basin that would later become county-owned land. Rachel leaned forward. "That's wrong." Clara looked at her. Rachel swallowed. "After what we saw today, it has to be wrong." Clara turned another page. There were signatures at the bottom. 3 men from the board, 1 county administrator, and Daniel Whitcomb. For a while, the room made no sound at all. Then Rachel stood. "No." Clara stared at Daniel's name. The signature was not forged. She knew the slant of the D, the way the W rose too high, the pressure mark at the end where his pen always dug into paper. It was his hand, his name, his choice. Rachel stepped back from the desk as if the report had heat coming off it. "He signed it?" Clara could not speak. "He knew?" Rachel said. "He knew those maps were wrong?" The paper blurred in Clara's vision. Daniel's words came back, not as comfort now, but as confession. "I thought I could fix it without making you hate me." Rachel covered her mouth. Then the anger came. Fast, because it had been waiting behind fear for years. "You kept all this for him," she said. "You fought the county, fought me, nearly got Eli hurt, refused enough money to save this house, and he was part of it?" Clara folded one hand over Daniel's signature. Not to hide it, to keep herself from shaking. "I didn't know. But he did." "Yes," Clara whispered. Rachel laughed once, but it had no humor in it. "So what was this? Guilt? Is that what the windmill is? Is that what the field is? Some monument to Dad feeling bad after helping ruin people?" Rachel: "No, Mom. Lydia Hensley left town. You said the Alvarez place went first. The Millers lost their farm. And Dad signed the report?" Clara looked at the county badge on the wall. For the first time in 7 years, she hated that it was still hanging there. She stood, took it off the nail, and laid it face down on the desk. Rachel saw the gesture, but it did not soften her. "You should take the money," she said. "You should sign, fix the house, and let Dad's ghost answer for himself." Clara looked down at the report again. She understood the temptation so clearly, it frightened her. The offer would end the calls, the warnings, the taxes, the leaks in the roof. It would let her stop waking every morning with Daniel's unfinished sentence beside her. It would let Rachel breathe. It would let the valley forget again. And forgetting had always been easier for those who could afford it. She picked up the report. For one terrible second, she imagined carrying it to the stove. The flame was already there, small and blue. One match of paper, one curl of smoke. Daniel's shame would disappear. Clara's burden would disappear. Rachel's anger would have nothing solid to hold. The county could have its project. Harrow could have its basin. The windmill could fall and become scrap. And the dead would stay politely dead. Clara moved toward the stove. Rachel watched her. "Mom." Clara held the report above the flame. The heat touched her fingers. Then, outside, a sound came across the dark field. A dry creak, metal shifting. Both women turned toward the window. At first, Clara saw only the reflection of the kitchen lamp. Then, the glass darkened as the light inside flickered. And beyond it, under a rising wind, the windmill moved. Not a full turn, not life, just one slow pull of the wheel against the bent blade. A tired, stubborn motion. Enough. Clara lowered the report. Rachel's face changed from anger to something more complicated. Not forgiveness, not understanding, but recognition that some things did not stop being true because they hurt. Clara turned away from the stove and laid the report flat on the table. Daniel had signed the lie, but he had also hidden the correction. That did not clear him. It did not save him from judgment. It only meant Clara had been wrong about the promise. She had thought Daniel asked her to protect his land. Now she understood he had asked her to do what he had not been brave enough to do while alive. Let the valley see the whole map. Clara smoothed the page with both hands. For the first time since Daniel died, she did not feel as if she were guarding him. She felt as if she were standing beside the people he had failed. By Monday morning, the county stopped laughing. That was when the notice arrived. It came folded in a white envelope, hand-delivered by a deputy who would not step past Clara's porch mat. He held his hat in both hands and looked anywhere except at her face while she read the first page. Temporary hazard and work interference order. The words were printed in bold at the top, clean and cold. Beneath them, the county claimed that Clara's windmill, open soil cuts, exposed stone channel, and unauthorized field activity posed a safety risk near a pending infrastructure easement. She was ordered to stop all excavation. She was ordered not to operate the windmill. She was ordered not to alter, remove, expose, photograph, distribute, or disturb any subsurface structures until the county completed review. Clara read the last sentence twice. "They're not worried I'll get hurt," she said. The deputy shifted his weight. "I just deliver them, Mrs. Whitcomb. They're worried the ground will talk." He gave her a sad look, touched the brim of his hat, and left. Rachel was still at the kitchen table when Clara came back inside. She had not gone home after the night they found Daniel's signature. She had slept badly on the couch, if she had slept at all. The report lay between them, weighted down by Daniel's brass oil can. Rachel read the order in silence. "This is bigger than us now," she said. "It was always bigger than us." "No, Mom. Now they can fine you. They can sue you. They can say you interfered with development. They can make you look unstable." Clara folded the notice carefully. "They've already tried." Rachel rubbed both hands over her face. "That's not what I mean." Clara knew. Rachel meant the bank account, the roof, the furnace, the unpaid tax notice tucked behind the flour canister, the pills Clara cut in half when she thought no one noticed, the practical life that did not pause just because old guilt had finally found paper. Before Clara could answer, a truck turned into the driveway. Not Grant's County truck, a black Harrow vehicle. Brent Vale stepped out carrying another folder. This time, there was no polite audience behind him. No road crew, no witnesses, just Brent, Rachel, Clara, and the farmhouse that looked more tired in morning light than Clara wanted to admit. "Mrs. Whitcomb," Brent said, "I hoped we could speak privately." "No," Rachel said before Clara could. "Whatever you say, I'm hearing it." Brent looked at her, recalculated, and smiled. "Of course." He placed the folder on the porch rail. "The company has authorization to make a final offer. It includes full purchase of the east acreage, payment of your property tax arrears, structural repair assistance for the residents, medical expense support, and a relocation option if construction affects access." Rachel did not ask the number this time. Brent said it anyway. The amount was higher than before, so high Clara felt Rachel go still beside her. Brent opened the folder to the signature page. "In return, Harrow requires confidentiality regarding private records connected to the site. That includes maps, handwritten notes, historical water reports, photographs, soil markings, and any materials that could be misunderstood before professional review." "Misunderstood," Clara said. "Misused," Brent corrected gently. "This kind of information can cause public confusion." Rachel stared at the number. Clara stared at the clause. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Brent lowered his voice. "Mrs. Whitcomb, I understand attachment, but your husband's old work could be interpreted in ways that damage his reputation. Ours is a responsible path. Let qualified people examine the records without turning a complicated history into a spectacle." There it was. Not just money. Mercy shaped like a gag. Rachel looked at Clara then, and Clara saw the war inside her daughter. Rachel hated Brent's words, but she also saw the roof sagging over the porch. She saw the doctor bills. She saw a way out. "Can we have a day?" Rachel asked. Clara turned to her. Rachel did not look away. "I'm not saying yes. I'm saying we need to think like people who still have to live after this." Brent closed the folder. Noon tomorrow. After he left, the house felt smaller. Clara carried Daniel's report to the back office, not to hide it, but because she needed to stand where his desk faced the east field. The windmill was visible through the window. Bent. Still, forbidden now by county order. On the desk, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "This is Maya Larkin. I shouldn't be contacting you. They know I visited the field. They told me to submit all notes through corporate review. Do not give them the original maps." Clara read it twice. Then another message arrived. "There's a man you should talk to. Warren Pike. He worked with your husband in 1968. I found his initials on an internal routing sheet." Clara's hand tightened around the phone. Warren Pike. She had not heard that name spoken in years. He had been the water board clerk when Daniel was young. A narrow man with silver hair, nervous hands, and a habit of standing near doors at public meetings. Clara remembered him bringing papers to the house once in 1969. Daniel had taken him out to the barn instead of letting him sit at the kitchen table. By late afternoon, Clara and Rachel found him at a small white house behind the old feed mill. Warren Pike was 88 now, thin enough to seem made mostly of bones and shirt cuffs. He opened the door, saw Clara, and looked immediately afraid. That told her more than greeting could have. "Daniel's gone," he said. "I know." Warren's eyes moved to Rachel. "You're the little girl." "I'm 59, Rachel said. He gave a weak nod. Still, Clara held up a copy of the 1968 report. Warren did not invite them in, but he did not close the door. "Did Daniel know it was wrong?" Clara asked. Warren's mouth trembled. That report was wrong before Daniel ever saw the final draft. Clara felt Rachel tense beside her. "Who changed it?" Warren looked past them toward the street, though no one was there. Men with plans, men with loans already waiting. Men who knew those small farms couldn't fight a county classification once the banks believed it. And Daniel signed. Warren closed his eyes. Yes. The word came out like something he had carried too long in his throat. Rachel stepped forward. "Why?" Warren opened his eyes again. "Because your mother was sick. Because he had a child. Because they told him if he refused, he would lose his job, and the county would bury the report without his notes attached. He thought if he stayed inside the board, he could fix it." Clara's voice was barely there. "Could he?" "No," Warren said. "Not then." "And you?" Rachel asked. The old man flinched. "I filed what I was told to file. That's not an answer. It's the only one cowards have." Silence settled on the porch. Warren turned away, then returned with a shoebox. His hand shook as he gave it to Clara. "Daniel came back for years," he said. "Measurements, old farm names, watermarks. He wanted enough to reopen it. I kept copies he didn't know I kept." "Why now?" Clara asked. Warren looked at the box, then at her. "Because I'm tired of outliving better men, and pretending that makes me innocent." On the drive home, Rachel held the shoebox in her lap as if it might break open and flood the car. For the first time since finding Daniel's signature, she did not tell Clara to stop. But she did not tell her to go on either. At the farmhouse, the county notice waited on the table. Brent's offer waited beside it. Daniel's report waited under the oil can. 3 kinds of pressure: law, money, memory. Clara stood between them and understood that the choice had changed. She was no longer deciding whether to save her land. She was deciding whether to let the whole valley keep living downstream from a lie. The storm arrived before midnight. It came over Whitcomb Ridge without ceremony, first as a low pressure in the windows, then as a hard wind that bent the cottonwoods behind Clara's barn until their leaves flashed silver in the dark. By 11, rain struck the roof in sheets. By 11:30, the power blinked twice and went out. Clara was already awake. So was Rachel. They sat at the kitchen table, with Warren Pike's shoebox open between them. The contents had been sorted into careful piles. Old routing slips, copies of well readings, hand-drawn overlays, farm sale notices, bank letters, and Daniel's field measurements written across scraps of county stationery. None of it looked dramatic by itself. That was the cruelty of it. A family could lose land through paper that looked ordinary. Rachel held one bank letter in both hands. The Alvarez loan was called in 3 weeks after the reclassification, she said. Clara looked up. Rachel's face had gone pale in the lantern light. They were told their acreage had no reliable water value. The bank reduced the collateral rating. She turned another page. The Miller brothers had to sell their basin rights before they could refinance. Hensley signed over the Lower East Run as part of a distress sale. Clara closed her eyes. The names were no longer names on a list. They were exits, empty pews, school desks, barns that disappeared and left only weeds behind. A flash of lightning filled the kitchen. Then Clara heard a sound beneath the storm. Not thunder, a heavy, distant alarm. Rachel stood. Is that coming from the data center? They went to the porch. Beyond the east field, past the black shape of the windmill, the new data center glowed under emergency lights. Red strobes pulsed against the rain. Trucks moved along the access road. Even from Clara's porch, she could see water standing where no water was supposed to stand. Her phone buzzed. Maya. The message was short. Main basin failing. Backup pumps overloaded. Water is moving under the south pad. If Daniel's southeast run is real, we need it open now. Rachel read it over Clara's shoulder. For a moment, neither of them moved. The county order lay on the table behind them. Clara was forbidden to disturb subsurface structures, forbidden to operate the windmill, forbidden to alter the field. The storm did not care. Clara took Daniel's jacket from the hook. Rachel grabbed a flashlight and the shoebox. They found Eli already at the gate, soaked to the skin, holding a pry bar and a coil of rope. I figured you'd be too stubborn to stay inside, he shouted over the rain. Clara almost smiled. Maya met them near the first exposed channel, wearing a hard hat and a rain jacket with the Harrow logo half covered in mud. Her face was white with fear. My supervisor told me to stay at the site, she said. Then why are you here? Rachel asked. Maya looked toward the water gathering near the ridge. Because the site is wrong. That was all the apology she had time for. They worked by flashlight. Rain filled the small holes faster than Eli could clear them. Clay sucked at their boots. The wind shoved water across the field in silver sheets. But beneath that surface chaos, Clara could see the old pattern waking. The shallow dips were no longer invisible. They filled, one by one, curved toward the windmill, and pulled water southeast just as Daniel's marks had promised. Maya pointed to a place near the second dip. There should be a capped junction here if the overlay is right. Clara turned to Rachel. Shoebox. Rachel pulled out the last folded map, the one Daniel had drawn on translucent paper. Until that night, it had seemed incomplete. But when Maya held it over the old county report beneath the flashlight, the missing lines aligned. Not with the official drainage map, with the erased one. The stone ditches were not random farm work. They were a buried relief system, older than the county basin, built to move stormwater away from the ridge and into the lower east run before it backed up under the valley floor. The windmill did not simply pull water from a well. Its pump chamber opened a gate in the old pressure line when the wheel turned hard enough in storm wind. Daniel had not preserved a relic. He had preserved a key. Eli found the capped junction under 12 inches of clay and roots. The metal cover resisted until his pry bar slipped and cut his palm. He swore, wrapped it in his shirt, and kept working. Careful, Clara said. No time for careful, Eli said. Just smart. On the third pull, the cap broke loose. A low sucking sound came from underground. Then the wind hit the tower. The bent blade shuddered. Maya looked up. If that wheel jams again, it won't, Clara said, though she had no right to know. Eli ran to the brake cable. Rachel held the flashlight. Clara climbed the first 2 steps of the tower before Rachel grabbed her coat. Mom, no. Clara looked at her daughter's hand. For years, Rachel had pulled her back from danger. This time, Rachel let go. Clara reached the brake, wrapped Daniel's old glove around the cable, and pulled. The windmill screamed. Then it turned. Once. Twice. The whole tower shook as if waking angry from a long sleep. The pump rod dropped hard. Rose. Dropped again. Below them, the open junction gulped water. The exposed stone channel darkened. Water that had been spreading wild across the field began to pull into the old run. At first it was a trickle, then a rope, then a fast brown stream sliding under the clay toward the southeast line. Maya fell to her knees beside the channel, watching the flow meter in her hand. "It's taking pressure off the south pad," she said. "It's actually taking pressure off." But Clara was no longer looking at the data center. She was looking at the map in Rachel's hands. Under the final translucent layer, Daniel had written more than water routes. He had written names. Not 3. 37. Families, parcel numbers, well marks, basin rights, sale dates, notes beside each one. Alvarez spring line misclassified. Loan called. Miller basin rights transferred below value. Hensley Lower East Run removed from parcel description. Tatewell declared seasonal despite continuous reading. Boudreaux drainage easement absorbed into county reserve. Klein widow signed under tax pressure. Rachel read until her voice broke. Maya took off her hard hat. Eli stood in the rain with blood on his hand and said nothing. The false lead died there in the mud. The secret was not that Clara's field held valuable water. It was that the valley's water had been used to steal value from everyone else. The 1968 report had not merely made a mistake. It had turned living water into dead language. It had made wetland look dry, shared drainage look private, old rights look expired, and desperate families look like willing sellers. Once the map changed, banks changed their numbers. Once banks changed their numbers, farms became weak on paper. Once farms became weak on paper, men with plans could buy them cheaply and call it progress. Daniel had signed the report. That would never stop being true. But after that signature, he had spent years measuring what had been erased. He hid tubes in the stone runs. He copied sale records. He marked every place the new maps lied. He kept the windmill alive not to save Clara's farm alone, but to prove that water still followed the old truth. Clara finally understood why he had said not to sell until the windmill turned in a storm. Only a storm could show the whole system. Only moving water could argue with 50 years of paper. Rachel lowered the map. "He wasn't trying to protect himself," she said. Clara wiped rain from her face, though some of it was not rain. "No," she said. "He was trying to leave enough for someone braver." Behind them, sirens moved along the ridge road. The data center's emergency lights flashed red against the storm. The old channel kept pulling water, not perfectly, not magically, but enough to prove the basin had been built on a lie. Maya looked at Clara. "If I file this," she said, "they'll say I used unverified historical material. Will you?" "Yes." "Then verify it." Maya looked at the water rushing through the stone channel. "I think we just did." At dawn, the storm began to weaken. The data center had not collapsed. The valley had not been saved in one night. The old windmill had not become a miracle machine. But the south pad was no longer taking water. The emergency pumps had stopped screaming. And in the east field, under Clara Whitcomb's dead clay, the forgotten run still carried storm water along the path Daniel had drawn. Rachel stood beside her mother in the gray light, holding the wet map against her chest. For the first time since finding Daniel's signature, she did not look at Clara with anger. She looked at the field, then at the names, then at the windmill still turning slowly above them. "What do we do now?" she asked. Clara looked toward the ridge, where county trucks were beginning to arrive. She thought of Brent's offer, Grant's order, Warren's trembling hands, Daniel's shame, Lydia Hensley's blue pencil box, the Alvarez spring line, the Miller basin rights, the names that had been pushed out of the valley quietly enough for everyone else to keep living. Then she folded Daniel's map once, carefully, along the old crease. "Now," Clara said, "we stop letting them call it dead land." By 8 o'clock that morning, half of Whitcomb Valley had heard that the data center nearly flooded. By 9, the story had already split into versions. Some said the old widow's windmill saved a $1 billion project. Some said Harrow's engineers had miscalculated the basin. Some said Clara Whitcomb had sabotaged the drainage field. Grant Hollis preferred the third version. He arrived at Clara's property with 2 county trucks, a sheriff's deputy, and the same folder he had carried at the survey meeting. Only this time, his boots sank into wet clay before he reached the gate. That seemed to bother him more than the storm damage. "You were under a county order," he said. Clara stood beside the open stone run, with Daniel's map folded in her coat pocket. Rachel stood on one side of her. Eli, pale from blood loss but stubbornly upright, stood on the other with his bandaged hand tucked against his chest. Maya stood a few yards away, speaking quietly into her phone. "I was also under a storm," Clara said. Grant's jaw tightened. "This property is now part of an active review. No documents leave this site." Rachel stepped forward before Clara could answer. "No," she said. "That is exactly how this started." Grant looked at her as if she had disappointed him by becoming inconvenient. "This is a technical matter. It stopped being only technical when we found the names," Rachel said. Grant glanced at the map in Clara's pocket. For the first time, Clara saw fear in him. Not guilt, not yet. Fear of records, fear of liability, fear of the past becoming searchable. Maya ended her call and walked toward them. Her face was drawn, but her voice was steady. "I submitted a preliminary incident memo to State Environmental Review," she said. "I included the flow readings from last night, the failed basin data, and the discrepancy between Harrow's current drainage model and the historical stone run." Grant turned on her. "You had no authority to submit anything outside corporate chain of review." "No," Maya said. "But I had an obligation to report a structural risk." Brent Vale arrived 10 minutes later, looking less polished than usual. Mud marked the cuffs of his pants. His phone rang twice before he silenced it. "Maya," he said quietly, "you need to come with me." She did not move. "I already sent it," she said. The silence after that was different from laughter. It had weight. Brent looked at Clara, then at Rachel, then at the exposed channel still carrying brown water under the field. "This does not need to become public confusion," he said. Clara removed Daniel's map from her pocket. It was private confusion that hurt people. By noon, the county called an emergency meeting at the old Grange Hall. They did not call it a hearing. They called it an information session, which meant they hoped no one would bring questions with teeth. They were wrong. People came in work shirts, church dresses, rain jackets, feed store caps, and muddy boots. Some came because they wanted to know whether the data center jobs were in danger. Some came because they had heard old family names. Some came because, after 50 years, a buried thing had finally made enough noise to be heard. Warren Pike arrived last. He came with a cane in one hand and his shoebox in the other. When Clara saw him at the doorway, she did not feel pity. Not exactly. Pity was too clean for a man who had carried truth quietly, while others carried the cost of his silence. But she did feel the burden of how old fear could make a person small. Grant stood at the front of the hall beside a projector screen. Brent stood near the wall. Maya sat alone in the second row, no longer wearing her Harrow badge. Clara noticed that. Rachel noticed too. When Grant began speaking about weather anomalies and outdated rural infrastructure, Rachel rose from her chair. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. "My mother has a list," she said. "And so do I." Grant tried to interrupt. Rachel kept reading. Alvarez, Miller, Hensley, Tate, Boudreaux, Klein. The hall quieted. With each name, someone moved. A man near the back took off his cap. An older woman pressed her fingers to her mouth. A younger man whispered, "That was my grandmother's place." Another said, "My uncle always said the well never went dry." Rachel read the notes beside the names. Spring line misclassified. Basin rights transferred below value. Lower East Run removed from parcel description. Seasonal well claim contradicted by continuous reading. She did not dramatize them. She did not need to. The plainness made them worse. Then Warren Pike stood. It took him a long time. No one helped him, though several people looked as if they wanted to. Clara understood why they did not. Some confessions had to stand on their own legs. Warren faced the room. "I filed the 1,968 routing sheets," he said. "I saw the changes before the report went final." Grant said, "Mr. Pike, This is not. It is, Warren said. The old man's voice was thin, but the room leaned toward it. I knew the lower runs had been removed. I knew the spring lines were marked unreliable when they were not. I knew some of those farms were being weakened on paper before offers came in. He looked at Clara. Daniel signed it. I filed it. Others ordered it. None of that brings back what was lost. A woman in the third row began to cry. Warren lowered his head. I am sorry, he said. Not because I got old enough to regret it, because you were owed the truth when it could still save your homes. No one applauded. That would have been too easy. But something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. Recognition. Brent left the hall during the questions. Grant stayed, but only because leaving would have looked worse. Maya stood and explained, carefully and clearly, how the storm proved the current model had omitted historic drainage. She did not blame superstition. She did not mock old maps. She said the word incomplete. That word changed the room. At the end, a lawyer whose father had grown up on the Miller place offered to review the documents. A retired teacher volunteered to help identify descendants of the listed families. Eli's uncle offered equipment to protect the exposed stone run without widening it. 3 neighbors who had laughed at the windmill signed up to stand watch overnight, in case county crews came early. Rachel sat down beside Clara. I thought you were choosing Dad over us, she said softly. Clara looked at Daniel's map in her lap. So did I. What are you choosing now? Clara looked across the hall at the faces of people whose families had been turned into footnotes. The trust, she said. Rachel nodded slowly. The next morning, Clara's attorney sent Harrow a formal refusal of the final offer. No confidentiality clause. No private review. No sale of silence. Instead, Clara proposed an emergency land and water trust, holding the East Field, the Stone Run, and all related historical water records until the affected families could be identified and legal claims reviewed. It was not victory. Not yet. The data center remained half-built. The county denied wrongdoing. Harrow issued a careful statement about cooperation. Grant did not apologize. Brent did not return, but Maya did. She came to Clara's porch near sunset, with a cardboard box of her own notes and no company badge on her jacket. I may need a new job, she said. Clara looked past her, toward the windmill. You know anything about old ditches? Maya almost smiled. Not enough. Then start there, Clara said. And for the first time, the old promise did not feel like something Clara carried alone. By late autumn, the East Field looked less like a battlefield and more like a place learning how to breathe again. The pink survey flags were gone. So were the county warning stakes. In their place stood short cedar markers that Eli had cut by hand and driven carefully into the ground, not to divide the land for sale, but to mark the old stone runs beneath it. Each marker carried a small brass tag with a number, a direction, and a name copied from Daniel's maps. Alvarez, Miller, Hensley, Tate, Boudreau, Klein. Not all the names had been matched to descendants yet. Some families had scattered across states. Some had changed surnames. Some had passed into silence so long that finding them felt like searching for rain in dust. But the retired teacher from the Grange Hall had begun calling church offices, county archives, school districts, and libraries. The lawyer from the Miller family had filed the first petition to preserve the historical water records. 2 state investigators had walked the field with Maya's memo in their hands and mud on their shoes. The data center still stood beyond the ridge. Half-built, fenced, quiet. Harrow Data Systems called it a temporary pause pending environmental and historical review. The county called it a procedural delay. Grant Hollis called it unfortunate. Clara called it time. Time was the one thing the lost families had not been given. The Emergency Land and Water Trust was not complete. Nothing involving lawyers, counties, water rights, and old harm moved quickly. But the East Field had been placed under temporary protection. The stone runs could not be cut. The old records could not be taken into private review. The windmill could not be removed without court approval. Rachel had read that sentence 3 times when the order came in. Then, she sat at Clara's kitchen table and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for Clara to understand that her daughter had been carrying more fear than anger all along. The farmhouse was still old. The roof still needed work. Clara still counted pills at the end of each month. Refusing Harrow's money had not made life easier. Truth rarely did that right away, but the house no longer felt like a place waiting to be taken. It felt like a place people came to with work in their hands. On Saturdays, Eli arrived with his uncle's tools and stayed until dusk. He rebuilt the lower pump box piece by piece, labeling every part he removed so he could put it back without pretending he understood more than he did. Maya came too, usually in jeans, boots, and a plain jacket with no company logo on it. She brought survey equipment, notebooks, and a humility Clara had not seen in her the first day. At first, Maya tried to measure everything: the grade, the flow, the pressure, the soil saturation, the angle of the stone runs. Clara let her. Then one afternoon, after a week with no rain, Clara handed Maya a shovel and pointed to a strip of pale grass cutting through the field. "Tell me why that line is different," Clara said. Maya looked at her receiver. "The elevation change is minimal." "I didn't ask what the receiver says." Maya frowned at the grass. Eli grinned from the windmill base, but wisely said nothing. Maya knelt, touched the soil, crumbled it between her fingers, and smelled it the way she had once watched Clara do. "It held water longer," Maya said slowly. "Why?" "Because the clay cap is thinner here." "And under it?" Maya looked toward the cedar markers. "Stone." Clara nodded. That was how the lessons began. Not as lectures. As noticing, Clara taught Maya how to read a line of cattails where no pond remained, how to recognize old water by the roundness of stones, how to tell the difference between runoff and remembered flow, how a windmill's rhythm changed when the pump was pulling against a blocked line, how a valley could look dry to a map and still be speaking underground. Eli learned differently. He learned through busted knuckles, rusted bolts, and the stubborn patience of old iron. By November, he could release the brake without making the tower scream. He could hear when the pump rod was striking off-center. He could oil the lower joint by feel. Clara watched them both one cold afternoon while Rachel patched a broken window screen on the porch. Daniel would have liked this, Clara thought. Then she corrected herself. Daniel would have been ashamed he had made it necessary. Both things could be true. That had become the shape of Clara's grief. Not clean forgiveness, not permanent anger, something harder and more honest. She loved Daniel. She missed him. She hated the signature he had left on the report. She honored the years he had spent trying to repair what he had helped break. She no longer needed him to be innocent in order for the promise to matter. One evening, Rachel found Clara in Daniel's office. The county badge was no longer on the wall. Clara had placed it in the desk drawer beside the 1968 report. Not hidden, not displayed, simply kept with the rest of the record. Rachel stood in the doorway with 2 mugs of tea. "I used to think you were keeping him alive by keeping all this," she said. Clara took 1 mug. "So did I. What are you doing now?" Clara looked out the window. The windmill stood in the field against a low gray sky. New bolts shone dull silver where Eli had replaced the old ones. One blade was still patched with tin. Clara had refused to replace it. Some scars were part of the testimony. "I'm letting him be dead," Clara said, "and letting the truth keep working." Rachel sat beside her. For a while, they watched the field without talking. Then Rachel said, "I found Lydia Hensley." Clara turned. "She lives in Arkansas now. Her married name is Porter. I called her yesterday." Clara set her tea down carefully. "What did she say?" Rachel's eyes filled, but she smiled. She remembered the blue pencil box. The first descendants came in December. Not many. Just 3 families at first, standing in the cold with coats pulled tight and old photographs held in gloved hands. Lydia Porter came with her son. A Miller granddaughter came with 2 boys who had never heard the word basin rights before. An Alvarez nephew brought a jar of soil his grandfather had kept from the West Spring line. Clara did not make a speech. She led them to the cedar markers. Maya explained the map. Eli turned the windmill brake loose when the afternoon wind rose. The blades moved slowly at first, then steadier. The pump rod began its deep, patient rhythm. Beneath the field, water shifted through stone laid by hands almost everyone had forgotten. No plaque was unveiled. No ribbon was cut. No one called it closure. The lawsuits would take years. Some claims might fail. Some records were missing. Some harm could not be measured, much less repaid. But as the windmill turned, the descendants stood in the place their families had been pushed out of. And for the first time, the land did not call them strangers. Clara watched Rachel speak quietly with Lydia Porter. She watched Maya show a child how to feel the difference between cap clay and water sand. She watched Eli listen to the old pump like it was teaching him a language. Then she looked at the windmill. Once, people had called it junk. Then, they called it evidence. Clara knew it was neither. It was work. Old work. Unfinished work. Work that had waded through rust, shame, silence, and 50 years of wrong maps. A light rain began just before dusk. Small drops touched Clara's face. The cedar markers darkened. The clay softened. Somewhere beneath her boots, water found the old run and moved in the direction it had always known. Rachel came to stand beside her. "Are you cold?" she asked. "A little. You ready to go in?" Clara looked once more at the windmill turning against the gray sky. "Not yet," she said. The blades kept moving. Slow, steady, carrying nothing anyone could see from the road. Only water, only memory, only the truth, finally allowed to follow its own path home.